Well, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining us on Facebook. Glad you took the time out of your Sabbath to join us. Obviously, we're not in service today, but we're coming to you online. It is the 4th of July weekend already. It's amazing how fast the year is going by. Before we jump into the message today, we wanted to just kind of mention about stuff that's going on in Israel. Keep checking up on the Israel guys and Eric Stakelbeck. They always have, the most up-to-date news and most accurate news as far as what's going on in Israel. As always, we keep Israel at the center of our hearts, because it's not just something we do; it's who we are. We just got back from the Kufai summit. And that's something that's so important. It was so important to Dad, and it's something that we carry on ourselves because it is who we are. Israel is a big part of us as a congregation.
Actually, even being in the 4th of July weekend, that was something that was very important to Dad too.
It really was.
Celebrating the nation and stuff like that.
That was everybody remembers him with the floats and the parade. And he would dress up. And I think that he's definitely passed that down to us. Like, I love the 4th of July. It's like one of my favorite holidays. But it's so much more than just
a holiday.
It's so much more than just what you think of with 4th of July, with fireworks and barbecues and all, dressing up patriotic and all that. And that's good. But what we want to get into today is what's the deeper aspect of it. And really, there's similarities between the United States and Israel as far as both of our nations were founded on principles from the Word. We're both Judeo-Christian nations. And much of this nation, our forefathers really had in mind the pattern of ancient Israel. You read the stuff from Jonathan Cahn, and he talks about really some of the same declarations that were made by forefathers of our nation were made by the founding fathers of Israel, if you will. And so that was the pattern that was set. Psalm 33:12 says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his inheritance." And I think this 4th of July we have even more to be thankful for because of who we have as our president again.
Definitely.
And we're in a much different place than we were last year on 4th of July.
The last 4 years on 4th of July.
The last 4 years on 4th of July, where it seemed like our freedoms were literally being taken away. We look at what happened all through the pandemic, and it seemed like one by one, so many of those freedoms that we can tend to take for granted were really being removed from us. Remembering the time when we couldn't even travel from state to state. We were pretty much just locked in Massachusetts, and it was illegal to go to another state. But on this 4th of July, I think we got to really focus on what that freedom is all about.
And it's actually, we're going to talk about how it's a freedom, but it's a freedom that has a gift and a calling to it. So like Jordan was saying, on this 4th of July, there's so much more to it than just what we know of as the normal celebration of 4th of July. And we gather not just to celebrate our nation's independence, but to reflect on the deep meaning of freedom, both as Americans and as Christians. Almost 250 years ago, it'll be 250 years next year, that many brave men and women declared freedom from tyranny. They envisioned a land where people could live in liberty, pursue justice, and worship freely, and we honor their courage. That's another thing about 4th of July, is we honor the people that went out and sacrificed their lives so many years ago so that we would be where we are today. And we'd have all these different freedoms.
Yeah, to be able to live in this land, to be able to worship. I mean, that was the biggest reason why they even came and started the war to begin with, to have the freedom to worship.
Exactly. So, we honor their courage and the sacrifices made by generations to secure our liberties. But while we enjoy political and civil freedoms, there's a greater freedom that Scripture calls us to, that we have to remember and recognize. And it's not necessarily a freedom that was won on the battlefields. It was a freedom that was won the day Yeshua went to the cross.
That's right.
and based everything off of where we are now. So actually, if we turn to Galatians 5:13, I'm going to read it in the Amplified Classic, but I'm going to actually read it in the ESV version first. In Galatians 5:13, this is Paul talking, and he says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." The Amplified says in the 5:13, "For you, brethren, were indeed called to freedom. Only do not let your freedom be an incentive to your flesh and an opportunity or excuse for selfishness, but through love you should serve one another." So the first point I wanted to get at with this is how freedom is a calling. So when Paul was writing this in Galatians 5:13, that we are called to freedom, this means freedom is not just a right. It is a divine calling. And this calling comes from Yeshua. You know, he says in John 8:36, "If the Son sets you free, you will be freed indeed." Through Yeshua, we are set free from sin, shame, guilt, and fear. True freedom isn't just the absence of oppression, it's the presence of righteousness, shalom, and purpose. So when you look at all that together, you know, as we celebrate, we're in 4th of July, you know, as we celebrate our national freedom, let us not forget the spiritual freedom that we have in Yeshua.
Most important.
Most importantly.
Because there wouldn't be the natural freedom if there wasn't the spiritual freedom.
Exactly. And that is the most important thing. But it's a spiritual freedom in Yeshua, and this is a key point to it, where no government, no law, and no enemy can ever take that away. And that's vital, especially in the day and age that we've been in, when we've had so many try to take things away from us, where we've had government try to take things away from us. You know, we got to remember, in Yeshua, there's nobody that can take anything away from us. That's true freedom. You know, and then when it comes all down to that too, you know, we're a free nation. We're blessed to be a free nation. We need to recognize how blessed we are to live in the United States of America. There's many nations in this world that don't have the people, the citizens don't have the same type of freedom that we have.
I mean, even our Constitution.
Exactly.
We have the longest living Constitution in history.
Exactly. But when you look at some of these other nations, you know, where there's people, they have no rights at all.
No.
They have no freedoms at all. They're totally run, so to speak, controlled, so to speak, by governments. So, you know, we're really blessed to be in a nation, even though we've experienced things in this nation ourselves, okay, and there's a lot going on, nothing like what has gone on in other countries. And we need to realize how blessed we are with that. But another point that I want to bring up about it is when Paul, you know, speaking in that verse, you know, he also warned us of something. And we need to realize, yes, we're free people. We've been given rights and privileges, but that freedom is not necessarily a license. It's not a license like, you know, you get your driver's license and now that gives you the right to be able to get behind a motor vehicle and drive a car legally. There's other things, you know, you've given rights to do certain things for the right.
But there's boundaries.
Exactly, that's the word. Yeah, there's boundaries. There's borders all around the freedom.
So even like your driver's license, it doesn't mean you have your driver's license, now you can go and go 100 miles an hour on the road.
Right.
Now
or
you can go
just can drive on the sidewalk. Or there's rules and regulations still to the freedom. There's those borders, not meant to control you, but to protect you and others around you.
Yeah, I was others around you. Yeah.
So with that, you know, Paul warns us, do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. And even very recently, in the last months or so, we have seen how freedom has been being used as an opportunity for the flesh to act out. But so in other words, you know, back to how freedom is not a license, it's not a license to do whatever you want. Like we we're just saying, it's not, you get your driver's license, that's not a license for you to do whatever you want behind the wheel of a car.
Right.
You know, that doesn't mean you can get on Route 2 and do 150 miles an hour. You can, now you can.
You have a free will.
You have a free will. And you can,
but you can't choose the consequence.
You can't choose the consequence. So there's a law that you can't go 150 on Route 2. And if you get caught, there's severe
Probably gonna go to
consequences
jail.
for 150 miles an hour. Exactly.
There's a responsibility
With
I
the
think,
freedom.
With the freedom.
And actually,
Oh, there we go.
freedom carries responsibility.
There we
That
go.
was my very next line.
Yep.
So freedom carries responsibility. Our national freedom is not meant for selfishness, indulgence, or apathy. It's not meant to get our own way by force in our mouths or by physical force. It's meant for building a just and compassionate society. It's meant for building in all honesty, it's meant for building a society based off the word of Yahweh.
Yes.
That's what our founding forefathers did. Likewise, our freedom in Yeshua is not for indulging in sin, but for living in holiness. You know, true freedom, like we just said a few minutes ago, does not mean doing what we want, but it does mean having the power to do what is right. So we have the freedom to do what is right.
Yep.
We have the freedom to do what is right by blessing people, by loving people, by showing people the right way to go in a world that is so violent, that has so much hatred in it, that has so much chaos in it.
Yeah.
True freedom holds the responsibility to flip the script and all that.
And you know, really, I mean, when you look at when this nation started going away from like the biblical principles, we live in a society now that is supposed to be the most tolerant society.
Right.
Supposed to be the most free society in this country.
Right.
You have the most freedom of speech, most freedoms to do what you want, and yet it's anything but that.
Freedom can be abused.
Freedom can be abused, and there's so many people that use that freedom, like she said, as a license to do whatever I want to do. So yeah, are you free in this nation to choose that you want to smoke and drink and do all kinds of stuff? Yes, but then how do I say this? When you go down the path of those behaviors, you find yourself not really free.
No, not at all.
No.
You're in bondage.
You're in bondage.
What's the opposite of freedom?
You're in bondage.
You're in bondage.
And you're always going to be in bondage to something.
Exactly.
You know, that as human beings, that's how we were made. We were made to serve something.
Exactly.
And it's our choice what we are going to serve. We have the freedom to choose what we'll serve.
Right, exactly. So that being said, that leads us to the next point, where freedom is for service.
I'm jumping ahead of you, sorry.
That's okay, no, that's fine. You know, freedom is for service. So in that scripture in Galatians, you know, Paul finishes the verse with really a very powerful statement. And it's when he says, through love, serve one another. You know, we serve a Yahweh of love. We serve a Yahweh of justice. We serve a Yahweh of freedom. We serve a Yahweh of shalom. This world was created by words of love. We were created by words of love.
That's right.
You know, he wanted family.
Yeah.
You know, everything is all based off of that. So when you look at the freedom that we've been given, the ultimate purpose of freedom really is to serve. It really is. What did Yeshua do?
He's the ultimate
He's the
example
ultimate
of it.
example. He came and he served.
And I'd say there's no freer person than Yeshua.
Exactly. You know, freedom in Yeshua leads us to love our neighbor, care for the poor, speak for the voiceless, act with humility. It leads us to do all these different types of things. And also, the freest person is not the one with the most choices, but the one who uses their freedom to bless others.
That's right.
They don't use their freedom to curse others. They don't use their freedom to hurt others. They don't use their freedom for their own benefit. Freedom is meant to bless others. You know, take for instance, you know, Jordan was going to talk about the different freedoms that we have and stuff. And one of them in this nation is that we have the freedom to carry arms. Okay, we have the freedom. Am I getting on to your thing?
No,
okay,
you're good.
so we have the freedom to carry. Okay, that's a freedom that was granted to us. That's
our
a freedom. It's a constitutional right.
Yeah.
That's a freedom that comes with great responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, very great responsibility. A lot of borders around that,
Yeah.
and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But you have people that are out there and will say how guns kill people. It's not the guns that kill people.
People kill
people. Kill people. Okay, it's the freedom that the person has.
Right.
A gun doesn't have freedom. Okay,
Look at Cain.
exactly.
He didn't have a gun.
Right.
He killed Abel with a rock.
Right.
Anything could kill somebody.
Exactly.
It's the person.
Exactly, and that's true. It's whatever. It could be, like you said, a rock. You could look at things that you could use to harm another individual. I mean, every
High
day
heel could harm somebody.
but everyday things
Yeah.
that we see in our lives. Okay, what do you use when you go to build something and you have a nail and a hammer? Okay, well, are hammers illegal?
No?
Do people make an outcry about hammers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ban hammers. Boycott all hammers.
Right?
Can you imagine?
But in all seriousness,
Yeah.
now I know that hammers have been used as a weapon.
JL is a good
Right?
example.
That's true. Yeah.
Gee, he hammered that
Right.
tent peg.
But there are so many things that are like that. The individual has the freedom to do whatever.
Right.
Not the object,
Right.
not the material thing. So, like I said, it's the one who uses their freedom and how they use it, either to bless somebody or to hurt somebody, to curse someone. It said in Matthew 20:26 when Yeshua was talking, and it says, "Whoever wants to be great among you, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant." Okay, and that's where it all comes down. Freedom is meant to serve.
Yeah.
How do we refer to those in the military or police officers?
Yep.
Thank you for your
service. 'Cause
The
they're serving
military,
us.
exactly, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, they're serving this nation. They're serving
helping
the
us keep
citizens.
our freedom.
Exactly. They're giving their lives every single day. Okay. Now, before they enlisted, they had the freedom to decide not to do that.
Right.
Okay.
Because it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory. But they enlisted because they believe in the cause, for one.
Yeah.
But when they're enlisting to serve this nation. And how are they serving this nation? They're putting their lives on the line to serve this nation by protecting it at all costs.
Especially nowadays.
Look at our police force, okay? How many times, we make it a habit and stuff where we see police officers and it's
thank
like,
them.
thank you for your service.
Yeah.
So that they realize
There are people that
appreciate them. Because the police force over the last few years have gotten a hard rap about some stuff, and this whole defund the police force and
Yeah.
stuff like that, just craziness. But it's like, no, these are people, and the military and the police officers are really a good example to use about service.
Yeah.
In serving to protect our freedoms. So whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, what Yeshua said. And so we see that so many with the military, with police officers, with so many other people in different things. Even in essence, you think about pastors. Okay?
We're supposed to be serving.
Pastors are serving their congregation. We're supposed to be the ultimate example of a servant, and serving the congregation in many different ways. And it all comes down to using the freedoms that we have to bless others and enrich others' lives for the better.
Right.
So with that being said and stuff, one of the things we need to recall, as we're in this 4th of July weekend, and we're lighting fireworks and flying the flag, rightfully so,
Yeah,
especially
it's celebrating
flying the flag.
That was one thing Dad was really big
Very
on.
big on.
On the floats.
Rightfully
we're
so.
going to have the flag all over the floats.
Exactly, rightfully so. Our flag should be honored. The United States of
Because
America
of what it
flag
stands for.
should be honored for what it stands for. There's that powerful picture of when what what fort was it when they were bombing and they were
Fort McHenry?
Fort McHenry, and is that powerful picture of those soldiers holding up the flag, because if any, you know what, it didn't matter, anything else around them could fall, but they were not going to allow that flag to fall because they knew what that flag stood for. And that flag, our flag, shows to the entire world what this nation is really about, and it represents liberty, freedom, everything that is wrapped up.
The blood of
the blood of
patriots.
those that died to make sure we had that freedom. But you know, we need to do more than just celebrate, and all that's good. You know, all that's good. But we need to, in essence, rededicate ourselves to what true freedom is, how it is a gift,
the cause.
and is it a calling? It is a calling, and
It's a cause.
it's a cause. So, you know, we need to be rededicating ourselves in such a way where we're grateful to be in this nation. We're grateful
It's the best
citizens.
nation.
It's the best nation
best
in the
nation
world.
on.
And we're very blessed to have been born into this nation, to live as faithful disciples of Yeshua, to cherish our freedoms and to use them in service of Yahweh's kingdom. And we must never forget, like we've been saying, that freedom is truly a gift and a calling. You know, all the freedoms we enjoy as citizens of this country, all the freedoms. You know, you ultimately can you can walk into any store you want to walk into at any time. You know, you can get behind the wheel of your car at any time and go do this. You know, you wake up one morning and decide, oh, I'm going to go to the beach today. You could. We have so many things. We don't even
That
have
we
to
take for
think
granted
twice. We really
almost.
take it for granted. We don't even have to think twice.
I mean, you hear some of the stories that come out of people who came from communist countries. You know, North Korea, Venezuela, you name it, and they come here, and it's like even the simplest thing, they're so grateful for.
Exactly.
Because they didn't have the freedom to make their own decisions in their country. Government made every decision for them.
Exactly.
And so, you know, sometimes it is good to step back and really look at what we have
Exactly.
and how blessed we are.
Right. You know, you look at, like, I was reading recently a story in the Soviet Union and Russia, and it's like, you know, in the wintertime, we get cold, and we don't have to think twice to go over to the thermostat and turn up the heat. They can't do that in parts over there. It's like, in fact, I had read one story in one Russian country or whatever it was, in the wintertime, they had turned the heat down even lower. And the citizens, the people that lived there, they had no right to even touch it. And they had to deal with some extreme temperatures. We don't know what that's like.
Yeah.
We have the freedom in our own house to walk over and control our own heat. You know, and this may seem like simple little things, but it's actually not. It's big things.
Or even back during the pandemic, what they were doing in China, locking people in their buildings.
Exactly.
They would literally not let them out of their buildings.
Right, exactly.
They had no freedom to make that decision.
No, exactly. So, you know, in this 4th of July weekend and stuff, it's like we need to realize and recognize what the true freedom is. And also, importantly, you know, we need to honor those who fought and died to preserve them. Even still to this day, many still dying, fighting and dying to protect and preserve what this nation stands for. But above all, we need to thank Yahweh for the freedom that we have in Yeshua. Most importantly, it's a freedom from sin and death.
Yeah.
It's a freedom from all things. And we need to not live for ourselves, but it's all ultimately for His glory. And we need to use our freedom to serve, to love, and to build a more just and holy world, because that's what it's ultimately all about. That's what true freedom is.
Yes.
You know, like we just said a little bit ago, you know, it's ultimate freedom in Yeshua. And that's what it all comes down to. If the Son sets you free, you are free indeed.
Yeah.
So,
I wanted to read a few quotes from some of our forefathers. You know, I looked up what they had to say about freedom. There was a letter that was written to Dr. Benjamin Rush in 1800 in which they said, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. So they were sworn upon the altar of God. See, they took it as their Christian duty.
Right.
To be hostile against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. So that was their cause for the freedom. They were fighting to be able to secure the freedom of all people.
Right.
You know, that all men are created equal.
Right.
That's what they said. John Adams, in a letter to Abigail Adams in 1775, said, liberty once lost is lost forever. That's another thing that we need to pay attention to. Ronald Reagan, I think I have that quote from Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said in his inaugural address in 1967, freedom is a fragile thing, and it is never more than one generation away from extinction. Those were warnings to us as a nation. He goes on to say, it is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people, and those in world history who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again.
Yeah.
You know, that, again, why do we make such a big deal about it? And there's some people who think that as Christians we shouldn't be talking about patriotism and loyalty to our country because, you know, we serve God only. But we are called to pray for the nation in which we live, because it says in the Word that in the prosperity of the city in which you live is your own prosperity. God called us here, so as long as we're here, we're called to be light in this world. We're called to be the ones in this nation that are keeping it according to its founding principles. And when it starts to stray, we're fighting to bring it back. That is what they founded it upon. You know, Patrick Henry, we know his famous quote, give me liberty or give me death. It's not just a cry of a revolutionary. It's the heart of a people who would rather die standing in truth than live enslaved by fear. You know, think of Esther. You know, if I perish, I perish.
Right.
That was that in even the apostles in Acts 5, they said we must obey God rather than man. Right. So whatever the cost is, you know, we need to stand up as those who have free will. When God created man, he created him with free will.
Exactly.
And you think of that, he could have created us as robots. He could have created us as we have to serve him.
Right.
That we're just going to... But then what, you know, if you're a slave to somebody, if you're being made to do something...
it's not genuine.
It's not genuine.
It's not authentic.
It's not authentic. I mean, I could hold a gun to somebody's head and make them say, I love you. What value are those words?
Right.
There's nothing
no value
behind
in
it.
Exactly.
You know, like I think Dad used to talk about, like if you hold a gun to the head and say, do you believe in Jesus? You know, eventually, fine, yes, I believe in Jesus because you're going to shoot me otherwise. That happened all through the Holocaust. That's happened through the ages with the Jewish people. But what value is that? Are those words? What value is that if it's not from a place of freedom of choice? George Washington said, "The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty is justly considered, staked on the experiment, entrusted into the hands of the American people." So he calls it a sacred fire of liberty. You know, it makes me think of in Timothy, where Paul tells Timothy to stir up the fire, keep the flame burning inside of you. And too many people get apathetic when it comes to our liberty and our freedom. It's like, again, like we said, it's taken for granted to such an extent that it's almost like, oh, well, you know, we don't even notice when our freedoms are being taken away.
Exactly.
Or oh, well, in the cause of it, people are saying it's better for everyone if we give up this freedom. But ultimately, the more freedoms that are taken away, the more we give up those freedoms, the less free we are as a whole people. Right. And Benjamin Franklin, as a matter of fact, said, "They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Those are pretty strong words. So you can see how passionate the founding fathers were about our freedom and liberty. John Adams said, "You will never know how much it has cost my generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it."
Yeah.
We got to take those words to heart.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know how much it cost that generation in 1775 to purchase our freedom.
Exactly.
You know, think of the winter of the red footprints in the snow.
Right.
Because they're literally marching. They weren't being funded. It's not even like the army today where they were getting a stipend for fighting. They were doing it because they were so passionate about fighting for their homes that they were doing it as poor as they were.
And a lot of them weren't even like trained soldiers like we have now.
No.
They didn't go through basic training.
It was a ragtag.
Exactly.
I mean, when you think of it, it's a miracle that our those patriot forefathers won the American Revolution.
It really is.
You think of it, it's not that much different than what happened with Israel in its early stages when it was reborn as a nation. Just coming out of the Holocaust and then winning the War of Independence and then the 6-Day War and all the wars that Israel fought as this tiny nation with a not a trained army.
Exactly.
But they were able to fight and win. Why? Because God was on their side. Because they were fighting for His cause, not just their own. And that's what our founding fathers did. In our war for independence, it started in the pulpits of New England.
Oh, really? Yeah.
The War of Independence didn't start on the battlefields of Massachusetts. It started in the pulpits. James Madison said, "The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of true liberty." And I would say knowledge that's backed by truth, because there's a lot of worldly knowledge that's going around out there that's there's no truth to it. I wanted to focus on this quote a little bit and go in a little bit more of a direction with this. Thomas Jefferson, in a summary view of the rights of British America in 1774, said, "The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy, but cannot disjoin them." And we know 2 Corinthians 3:17 says, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." So when they were looking at what Britain was doing, what the British Empire was doing, what King George was doing, they were realizing that the Spirit of the Lord was not behind it. That there was more and more, or I would say less and less freedoms that they were having, and more things that were being imposed upon them that they were supposed to do. And so the preachers during that time that were standing on the side of the revolution were saying, as it said in Acts 5, we must obey God rather than man. We can't be submitting to a king that's telling us to go against what we believe God's telling us to do. And there's some truths that go so deep into the fabric of creation that no empire, no tyrant, it doesn't matter who it is, no human power can unravel them.
Exactly.
This is what Thomas Jefferson, he wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a prophet, but he tapped into that line, the God who gave us life, gave us liberty at the same time. So he was recognizing something that I think a lot of times we can tend to forget, that liberty is not a political invention.
Exactly.
It's not something that a government invented. It's a divine gift. It was given to us at creation. It was woven into our I would say our DNA. When God breathed His Spirit into dust and created man out of it. He gave us that liberty at the very beginning.
Exactly.
It's, when it says the God who gave us life, we live in a world that's obsessed with origins. Like, where did we come from? How did everything start? And some people go down, it was a big bang. Well, I'm sure that when God spoke, it was a big bang. But and then the ultimate question that you hear people asking, why are we here? Like when it comes down to it, what was my purpose for being here? Many people can say, well, I feel like I'm an accident. Like there's no purpose. But scripture in Genesis 2:7 says, then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So that life was not man-made. It was God himself. God breathed.
Exactly.
You know, when we talked a few weeks ago about words, he spoke things into existence by his words. So your existence is intentional. He had a purpose for it. And not just your breath, but your freedom too.
Exactly.
There was an intention behind that freedom. He created Adam with free will. And now when you think of it, he gave him the freedom to choose. He gave him the freedom to obey or to rebel. Ultimately, we know what Adam chose. But from the beginning, think about this. God risked rejection so that our worship would be real.
Exactly.
He risked, I mean, think of, just as a human, how many times we avoid any potential of rejection. Like, I'm not going to go there or say this or do this because I'm afraid it will be rejected. Yahweh, he created us with the very potential to reject him. I mean, what kind of God is that? That he would do that. He's the creator. He had the ability to do whatever he wanted to, but he handed the reins to us. And not only that, he handed the reins of planet Earth to us. Like, you have dominion now over this. And so Thomas Jefferson, when he's standing at this crossroads in American history, he's basically coming to this realization that if God is the author of life, then he must also be the author of liberty. And for what is life without freedom?
Exactly.
I mean, think of I don't know why this comes to mind, but if you think of a lion that's locked in a cage, that lion's miserable. He's living his entire life in this cage, not being able to live out his full potential, not being able to do what his purpose, not being able to do what he's called to do. And so if we're not free, then we're literally being caged up and kept from our purpose. You know, the horrible days of slavery in this country. You know, they read some of those things, and I mean, really, I think that's the height of, I don't know, humans trying to be God. I'm going to own this other person like they're an animal. That's not what our freedom was meant for.
Not at all.
But our liberty is not just freedom from tyranny, but like Sherry said, it's freedom from sin. It's meant to be that we extend the freedom beyond just, okay, I can do whatever I want, to, okay, political freedom without spiritual freedom is just a longer leash. Like, I'm letting you out a little bit longer. But if you're not truly spiritually free, you know, like if the Son has set me free, I'm free indeed, like you said. If we're not truly free, then it doesn't matter if we even live in the middle of the United States of America with all the freedoms around us, then we're still a caged individual. We're somebody that is locked up in some way.
It's like example you said earlier about being in bondage to something. When you're in bondage to something, obviously you're not free. But you're not free to live out your fullest. You know, whatever that bondage may be, whether, like you were saying, you could be in bondage to, you know, drinking. Well, think about drinking. Right? Actually, that could be a good example because, you know, people that indulge too much in alcohol, they're in bondage to that alcohol, and they are in actuality are not free to live the way they should be living because the alcohol is controlling them.
It is.
Everything they do, they're thinking.
And they'll try to say, well, I could stop any time.
Right, but you're in bondage to it. You know, and so in that bondage, there's no freedom. That bondage is stopping you from living out to your fullest potential and purpose.
Exactly. And you know, Yeshua, what was the big thing that he said when he came in Luke? He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives." He wasn't just talking about people who were locked up in jail or, you know, under physical bondage, slaves. He was talking more about Rome, more than just about Rome. He was talking about breaking the chains of sin.
Yeah. Things they're captive to.
Exactly.
Like drinking.
Exactly.
There's different things you can be captive
Yeah.
to.
And that's something that the enemy is always trying to pull us into.
Exactly.
You know, what does it say in Hebrews 12 where it says to run the race and throw off everything that entangles you.
Right.
Well, those are the bondages. Everything that is a weight upon you. Everything that's holding on to you that shouldn't be holding on to you.
Look at, for example, like fear. Okay, now the title just dropped in me because I have the little book at home from, I think it's Kenneth Copeland,
Freedom
from
Fear.
Fear. Freedom from Fear.
Exactly.
Okay, there's so many people that are held captive by fear.
Yeah.
They're in bondage to fear.
And that can literally keep you locked
Paralyze
up in your
you.
home.
Exactly.
It can paralyze you.
We know people personally because of fear that have been locked up in their home. They're held captive by fear.
Yep.
You know, and so there's no freedom in that whatsoever.
Right.
Especially when you're held captive by, you know, you think of these people that are held captive by fear in their own homes. They have no freedom to do whatsoever.
No.
Nothing.
They
You know?
can't make their own choices because something else is driving.
Fear is controlling the thought
Exactly.
process.
Yeah.
You know, so they don't have the freedom to make a rational choice because fear
Right.
is in control.
Yep.
Fear is the one that's steering their thought process to make these irrational choices.
Exactly.
Because that's what fear does. Fear causes you to make irrational choices.
Yep.
You know, and so, you know, just a good example how, especially with fear, there is no freedom in that whatsoever. Fear steals any freedom that you may have in a certain area.
It's true.
You know, no matter what the fear is.
Right.
Even if it's something silly, you think something, you know, people that are held captive by the fear of bugs, okay? By the fear of spiders or
Yeah.
by the fear of bees or whatever.
It will literally stop them from going to a place that they want to go.
Exactly.
Or doing something they want to do
Right.
because there's potential that could be there.
Exactly.
And why is it that so many times in the Word does he say, do not fear? Why does he say so much? Why is Yahweh so hard on sin in the Bible? We can say, oh, he's just being a taskmaster and trying to keep you in bondage. No, he's trying to prevent you from being in bondage to something.
And why do they use the word freedom from fear?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
There could be other words that they could use,
Yeah.
you know, delivered from fear.
Yeah.
Or which in deliverance there's freedom. There's other words that could be used to that, but it all points back to freedom.
Yep.
Freedom from fear.
Fear.
When you're free from something, you're
It
free
no
from
longer
its
has a hold.
grips.
Yep.
100%.
Yep.
It has no more hold on you. 100%.
Right. And it's like we were talking a few weeks ago about being dead to sin, and how, like, if somebody's dead to something, really they're not being held captive to it anymore.
Right.
There's no longer the desire. When you're really free from something, it's not a struggle anymore.
Right.
Once you get beyond that, where you've been delivered, you've been set free. Whatever it might be, whether it is alcohol. Think of somebody, just take that for example. If somebody finally goes through the detox process and they're no longer an alcoholic. Now, by the way, they can't let themselves go back and take another one.
Right.
But the freedom that they experience, and I've personally heard people talking about being free from alcohol, even though they thought they were free when they were drinking it.
Right.
But when you're on the other side, they realize I'm an entirely different person. Now
It's a
I can
false
do.
freedom.
It's a false freedom.
It's a false freedom.
You know, and just like fear, we say fear is false evidence appearing real. The devil is a counterfeit.
Exactly.
So he'll always come to try to offer you something that seems like the real thing, but it's not.
Exactly.
So he's going to come and try to say, you are free. You can choose to do this sin. You can choose to drink this alcohol.
Right.
But in reality, when you choose to go down that path, you're coming under his jurisdiction.
Yep.
So now you're serving him, and whatever you serve, you're now a slave to.
Exactly.
And so you're not really free. But Yeshua came so that we can be free and completely free.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're trying to communicate every week is
Yeah.
how do we get to the point in Yeshua where we are living up to the fullness of our freedom in Him, where we're living up to the full potential that He gave us.
Right.
And so back to what Thomas Jefferson was saying, he said that the hand of force may destroy but cannot disjoin them. What does that mean? It can't separate them. Think of Romans 8, what can separate us from the love of God? It's tribulation or distress or persecution, because what God has joined, no man can separate. Not Pharaoh, not Caesar, not Herod, not King George. It didn't matter. Whatever God joined together, and not fear, not failure, not even death can separate.
Exactly.
And so we're living in a time when our freedoms, when life and liberty are both under constant redefinition. People are constantly trying to redefine it because they don't want to be accountable to what it means.
Right.
The church has to stand not just for our political rights in this time, but for the spiritual truth. Life is sacred from the womb to the tomb.
Right.
That whatever we're fighting for, our cause is just.
Right.
And when we're fighting to guard these freedoms, we're not just fighting for ourselves.
Right.
We're fighting for the good of the nation, for the good of people. And the freedom that we're celebrating on this 4th of July weekend, it didn't just begin in the hearts of men. It began in the mind of God.
Yeah, exactly.
It was in His mind.
Exactly.
The nation. In our nation, we can guarantee freedom of speech, we can guarantee freedom of religion, we can guarantee the freedom to vote. We have the ability to vote in this nation. That's something that a lot of nations don't have. But only Yeshua can guarantee the freedom from shame, guilt, bitterness, addiction, whatever. The cross was the most revolutionary declaration of freedom the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
We talk about our Declaration of Independence. The cross, ultimately, when Yeshua died on that cross, that was the most revolutionary declaration of freedom. He literally laid down His life so that we could be free. I mean, when you think of that, the awesomeness of that, the fact that He did that. We were not just born into this country, but we were born again into a kingdom. And it's a kingdom that can never be shaken. So not only should we be waving the flag on 4th of July, but we should be bowing the knee to the Creator who this country was founded on. And that freedom has to be guarded. It has to be fought for.
Exactly.
Because freedom really isn't free. And like John 15:13, Yeshua said, "No greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." That's what Yeshua did. In our country, like we said in the beginning, we're honoring those who paid the ultimate price for our freedom.
And it's there's always a price for something.
There's always a cost.
price. Always, I just thought of the example that Dad used to use, where he'd say, somebody would be like, "Oh, I got this for free."
Yeah.
Nothing is ever
lunch.
really free. Yeah. Oh, I got a free gift in the mail.
Yeah.
This because I did this, I get a free gift, and it's like nothing's ever really free.
Somebody
Maybe you
paid
got
for
the
it.
free gift, but somebody else had to pay for that gift. Somewhere there's always a price for it.
Yeah.
Nothing is ever free. And that's what you got to remember.
Yeah.
Our freedom wasn't
Free.
given to us free.
Right.
It wasn't free.
It wasn't just that Britain said, "Okay, here you go. Here's a free country."
There was a severe price paid.
There's a heavy price, and in that fighting for the freedom, like we said before, the freedom comes with boundaries. Doesn't mean doing whatever you want. That sounds un-American. This American idea of you can do whatever you want.
Exactly.
Well, no, you really can't do whatever you want. You can choose to do whatever you want, but you might
have a consequence that you didn't want.
But you were freed from something for something. You were freed in Yeshua. You were freed from sin. Romans 6:18 says, "You have been set free from sin and have become slaves to righteousness." So you've been set free from one thing to become a servant for something else, for a purpose.
Right.
Your freedom has a direction.
Right.
You know, I think directionless freedom is probably one of the most dangerous things. That's when people, you know, they become their own. It was like in ancient Israel when they had no king and every man did what was right in his own eyes.
Right.
That's a dangerous place to be when there's no boundaries. You ever see children that are raised with no boundaries?
Yeah, right.
They're terrors, like literally. But if somebody doesn't have the boundaries and their freedom is directionless, they become one who harms others instead of doing good to others.
Right.
Because it's the nature of the flesh.
Exactly.
The enemy will always bring us down that path
Right.
if we don't have those boundaries. We are called to live worthy of Yeshua's death. We're called to live worthy of the price he paid for our freedom. We're called to live worthy of the price that our founding fathers paid for our freedom.
Right.
We should be living every day in honor of what they did.
Exactly.
We were freed from sin for righteousness, like it said in Romans. We were freed from selfishness for service. We were freed from condemnation to be a new creation in him. So you don't see in the Bible where it says, okay, I have set you free and now you can go and do whatever you want. And in a lot of times in the Christian world now, there's this idea of this free grace.
Right.
Where it's like, Yeshua paid the price, so we don't even have to repent anymore. Right. Like there's no sin.
Right.
You know, he's already covered it all, so go do what you want.
Right. Just back to that for a second. You know, we're a free people, we're a free nation, and in that freedom, there's rules and regulations. Okay, there's rules and regulations to so many different things. Yeah. Why are there rules and regulations? To keep you safe in your freedom.
Yeah.
If there were no rules and regulations, like you were saying, you know, you could just do whatever you want.
Right.
There's much more higher chance of danger in that freedom.
Right.
Freedom can be good or freedom can be
used for bad.
So, you know, people complain about rules and regulations and stuff, but those rules and regulations are meant for you to be safe in your freedom. Like we were saying at the beginning about driving a car.
Yeah.
There's rules to the road.
Yeah.
Okay? There's laws, there's regulations to abide by to keep you safe in that freedom that you were given to have the right to drive.
Right. But you think of it, even like, say you're going down a road and there's a guardrail on the side of the road. You know, what is the guardrail there for? You know, somebody could come and say, it's keeping me restricted from being able to go where I want.
Right.
Okay, it's actually there to protect you from not going off the cliff into the river. You know, there's a purpose for the guardrails. There's a purpose for fences around the yard. You have your child out in the yard, playing in the yard and running around, and they can have all the fun they want within the boundaries.
Exactly.
What are you? They might say, well, I don't. It's not fair. You're not letting me just go wherever I want. No, I'm trying to protect you until you know how to use your freedom properly.
Right.
Until you have the wisdom that comes with the years of knowledge to know that you can't just go and play your cars in the middle of the road. You know, no, the boundaries are there to keep you safe.
That's why you put a baby in a play yard.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know how fast children can move?
Yep.
Yeah, you got to containerize them sometimes. But it's, you know, and people can look at some boundaries as that's just cruel. No, the boundaries are there to protect. So freedom doesn't mean just doing whatever we want. It's doing what we, doing what our purpose is within our boundaries. That's what this book is.
Exactly.
If you want to talk about a book of rules, what is it called? The law.
Right.
It's the book of the testimonies. It's his written instructions.
Right.
Instructions on how to live in this life.
Right.
It's
but who created the book?
Yeah.
The author of freedom.
Exactly. The one who knows everything.
Exactly.
Like if we thought that we knew something better than the Word, then we're ultimately saying we know something better than God.
Right.
You know, and we don't. Nobody does. But when it says, again, in Galatians 5:13, what she read, do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, rather serve one another humbly in love. So our freedom is not for flaunting in front of people. Our freedom's not for stomping all over people online. You know, you keyboard warriors out there, just I'm going to go and tell you, you are an idiot. You know, that's not what our freedom is for.
No.
Nor should you be doing that as a believer.
No.
Just saying.
Especially
as a believer. Do not, you know, I get so...
If you have nothing good to say, just...
If you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything. And you know, some people are posting things just to get a reaction out of people. And people are taking the bait all the time.
Right.
And this is part of the reason... I'm going down a rabbit trail here. But this is part of the reason why I have taken a break from social media.
Yeah.
You know, I honestly... Going on there, and you can see the nicest posts. The kind, you know, it's a post about an animal... Somebody will have something to say about it. Okay, it's a child show jumping, and somebody's going to come up and say, "Well, her position isn't right, and she's pulling on the horse and all this stuff." And it's like the negativity. It's like, okay, it's just it can be draining.
Yeah, you're not using your freedom to bless others.
And the worst is when you see somebody who goes and comments and is like, "Because I'm a Christian, you shouldn't be doing."
Oh yeah, you're not a Christian.
You know, honestly, it makes me not want to be associated with those kind of people.
Definitely, they give the real Christians a bad name.
They give them a bad name.
A bad picture.
You know, again another rabbit trail, but there's an organization that helps to capture online predators, and in one of their particular arrests that were made, the police started interviewing this guy. He said, "Oh, I was just trying to meet up with this girl to lead her to Christ. I was going to witness to her about Christ." And the officer says, "And that's why you were sending her all the explicit text messages that you were?" "Yeah, I just wanted to play her game so I could lead her to Christ."
You're right.
At that point, it's like, just leave him out of it.
Exactly.
Like, you're giving everyone a bad rap.
Exactly.
So our freedom, we got to be taking it we got to be walking very responsibly with the name that we carry. Both as Americans. I mean, we walk out into the rest of the world, and as Americans, a lot of Americans have a bad rap in the rest of the world, known for being entitled and whatever else. But Christians have that same bad rap. You know, Brother Copeland, I see all the time, he talks about being frustrated with Christians who go into a restaurant and they eat and all that, and they're trying to get a deal out of the restaurant rather than giving a tip. I want to be blessing above what the cost is. Rather, I'm just going to try to use my Christianity as I'm a pastor, so can you give me a tip? You know?
Or they get upset because the waitress made a mistake.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Honestly, some of the most unkind words I've heard in my life
Are to waitresses and waiters.
Are to waitresses and waiters, but some of them have been the most unkind words I've heard in my life have been out of the mouths of Christians.
Yeah.
That should not be.
No, not at all.
That should not be. That's not who we're called to be.
Right.
We're not called to be using our freedom in the Messiah to be beating everyone else down. So our freedom isn't for stomping people online. That's back to that. It's not for doing whatever just feels good in the moment. I can do whatever I want. It's not for eating whatever you want. That's a whole other sermon. Going wherever you want. It's not for doing whatever you want. It's for love, and it's for serving Yahweh. That's the purpose of our freedom. So we're free, but we're not without a master. And we don't want to be in this life without a master.
Right.
You know, Romans 6:22 says, "Now that you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of God, the benefit you reap leads to holiness, and the result is eternal life." So we're slaves, but there's benefits to our being slaves of Yahweh.
Right.
Where it's a what do they call it? An indentured servant. You know, you willingly put yourself under the control of someone else because you see the benefit of it. There was a lot of people who came to this country as indentured servants. Like, I don't have the money to pay for my trip to America, but I see the value in being in America, so I'm going to indebt myself to this rich person. I'm going to say, I'm going to be your servant for X amount of years until I pay off my debt. I'm going to serve you. That's entirely different than the slavery that was happening in the South, where they go and take somebody and make them their slave. Yahweh will never go and make somebody do something. Holy Spirit will never make you do something. He will never force. He's not someone who will force you. If he was going to force anybody to do anything, he'd force you to get saved. Because that's what's good for you. But he's never going to force you. But there's benefits to you submitting yourself to him.
Yeah.
It's not just, I'm going to submit myself and now I'm going to live a life that's terrible. And, there's benefits to serving him. So everyone serves something. That's what we got to get across our minds, is everyone is serving something. Whether you're serving sin, the enemy. You don't, when you were a sinner, because we're no longer sinners, we're saved. I don't like that. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. No, if you're a child of God, you're no longer a sinner. Right. You were a sinner. You might sin, but that shouldn't be your nature anymore. But before Yeshua, we didn't just struggle with sin, we were slaves to it. You don't struggle with something you're yielding to. Right. Like, I never struggled with this sin. No, because you were yielding to it. Right. We served our flesh, we served our pride, our addictions, our anger, whatever the case might be. You were serving that. But now we've been set free from the enemy. We've been set free from sin. We've been set free from ourselves, because sometimes we're our own worst enemy. And we've been set free for Yahweh. Right. So that's the purpose of it. So, it might sound strange to say we're slaves of God, but it's that, like I said, it's that indentured servant type of thing. Our freedom is not about having no master, it's about having the right one. Right. And that makes all the difference in our lives. Our master doesn't exploit us, he redeems us. Right. He doesn't chain us up, he changes us. He doesn't beat us down, he builds us up. Right. And that, then it's a healthy thing. 1 Peter 2:16 says, "Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves." So, again, we're free to do what we're created to do. Worship him, obey him, love him, serve Yeshua, reflect Yeshua to the world. Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it too, in that you have the freedom of the enemy fleeing from you.
Exactly.
What does it say right before?
Submit yourself to God.
Resist the devil and he will flee from you.
And too many people just want to have the benefits of the end part without the submission.
Right, exactly.
I don't want to submit myself to anybody.
Right.
Why is it that so many people have a hard time believing that there's a God? Because then I'm accountable to him. Mm-hmm. Then I have to accept that he's bigger than me and that I'm responsible to something. Right. But there's benefits that come with it, because then the enemy will flee from you. Mm-hmm. He's not going to run all over your life and eat your lunch.
Right.
I would say that's a pretty good benefit to submitting to God.
Exactly. Yeah.
But how many times do we not do that?
Right.
Anyways, but your life is not your own. You're bought with a price. Right. But that sounds like it might be bad news. You're not. Your life is not your own. Right. But it's actually the best news in the world, because you've given your life, you've given your will over to the only one who truly knows what to do with it. Right. He'll guide you in ways that you never could have imagined. He'll lead you to the best place you could ever be. So in talking about freedom, we could go in pretty much any direction. We talked about the right to bear arms and all the constitutional rights, but we in this congregation love the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. We talk about our First Amendment rights all the time, and we thank God for that. But just because you can say something and call it freedom of speech doesn't mean you should.
Exactly.
Proverbs 18:21, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Mm-hmm. Words are powerful. We got to take them very seriously. Every word you speak is planting something. Right. But it's, what are you planting? Are you planting peace, or are you planting poison? Right. Matthew 12:36 says that I tell you, everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. Yeah. So the freedom of speech that we have in this country is not meant to be a freedom to gossip. It's not meant to be a freedom to slander.
It's not meant to be abused.
It's not meant to be abused, and so many people are abusing the freedoms. Mm-hmm. It's not meant to be used to stir up hate. We saw a few weeks ago how the results of people calling for violence, results of people calling for violence in the name of free speech. Right. Free Palestine was used as the call in that senseless murder of the Jewish couple in D.C. back in May. Right. It's horrible, but it didn't start it didn't come out of a vacuum.
No.
It was not just this random crazy man decided to go in and shoot randomly.
Right.
No, it came from the consistent lies, the propaganda, the words that were spoken that were not addressed, that were allowed to stand, that were allowed to, they weren't corrected. And it fueled this demonic hatred that then led to action.
Right.
So we got to be aware of what that actually means. What does freedom of speech even mean?
Right.
And be using it in the right way. As believers, our words should be used as weapons of love. Mm-hmm. They should be used just like a weapon is meant to hit its target. Every word should be used to hit a target that is meant to set people free, right. not to lock them up in bondage. Right. The freest people in the kingdom, like Sherry said earlier, are those who serve the most. Yeshua, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the nature of a servant, it says in Philippians 2. So when we're living our freedom out in that way, it becomes contagious. Mm-hmm. You see somebody who's a giver, somebody who is always filled with joy, always just seeming like there's nothing in the world weighing them down. That's contagious. That's something that people want to be like. What do you have? What is it that gives you your life?
Yeah. It attracts people to you.
It does.
Instead of repelling them
from you.
You don't want to be a repeller.
Don't be a repellent Christian.
Don't be an attractor.
Don't be a repellent Christian. That's the mission. That is the mission of our freedom.
Right.
Galatians 5:14 says the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Now, this is a rule. This is a boundary. Love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. That is our mission. We were set free from the enemy to be a builder, not a burner. Right. We're not called to burn down cities. We're not called to. No. We're not called to do that. No. We were given a voice to bless, not to curse. Right. We were forgiven so that we can forgive others. Right. What we have, we're supposed to be giving unto others. Right. That's what our freedom is for. We were delivered so we can deliver others. Mm-hmm. Like we've talked about before. In areas that the enemy might have been able to hold us captive in the past, in areas where something may have happened to us in the past. Those very areas can be used by Yahweh. He takes what the enemy meant for evil and turns it for good. Those very areas can be used by Yahweh to minister to others who have gone through something similar. Definitely. You're positioned in such a place that now I can tell you, how did I overcome these things? Right. How did I make it as far as I have made it? Right. And it's only by the grace of God and what He's directed me in. Right. So we, as Americans, we celebrate a freedom on the 4th of July weekend that costs blood. But as Christians, we live a freedom that costs divine blood. Yeah. That's a very high cost.
Exactly.
So, biggest thing I would say is don't waste it. Right. Don't weaponize it, certainly. Right. Don't treat it like a trophy to be put on a shelf. Oh yeah, I'm a Christian. It's like a badge. But you need to live it. You need to use it. You need to share it. You need to live. It's a freedom worth living for. Right. It's a freedom worth dying for, but it's a freedom worth living for. And we got to live like we're responsible for the freedom we've been given. Exactly. We got to live in such a way that we're bringing honor to the one who called us to this place.
Not dishonoring it.
Not dishonoring. Never in a place of dishonoring His blood. Right. It was probably a message for another time, but when in John Adams' letter to Abigail, when he was saying that freedom can be lost. Right. And once that freedom is lost, like Ronald Reagan said, it's hard to gain it back.
Exactly.
And it makes me think of when it talks in the Bible about the person who has tasted of the heavenly gifts and tasted of the goodness of God and experienced the gifts of the Spirit and all that. If he falls away, how can you bring him back to repentance? Because he was free. So once you're free, and then you choose to go back into a life of slavery, the alcoholic, that was set free. Think of somebody who was sober for years.
Right.
And then they choose to go back. Oftentimes their condition is worse than it was at first. Yeah. So we got to be aware of guarding these freedoms. We got to be aware of what Yahweh has called us to do with it. Exactly. You know, that we're blessed to live in this country. We're blessed as believers with the freedom that Yeshua bought for us. But we got to live it purposely. You know, it's a gift, but like you said, it's a calling too. Yeah. So, you have anything else to add to that? Well, thank you for joining us today. We trust you got something out of this message. We will see you next Sabbath at 11 a.m. Until then, you have a blessed week.